What do you think of when you think of yoga? It's probably the physical shapes themselves, maybe meditation, and perhaps a little bit of breath work sprinkled in. What most people do not realize is this is just 3 components of yoga philosophy. Overall, there are 8 components of yoga philosophy, and these are known as the 8 limbs of yoga. Today, I am going to very briefly discuss the 8 limbs of yoga and what it means when people say that yoga is a lifestyle. So if you have heard a yoga teacher say yoga is a lifestyle, this is what they mean. They mean that there are multiple practices and guidelines, essentially, and yogic philosophy of how to live a yogic life. So we'll go ahead and dive into the first limb of yoga, which is probably different than what you think it is, and it is called the yamas. The yamas are essentially a moral code or social restraints. Some people like to think of them as external disciplines. So when we say external, we're talking about outside of our body, towards other people. There are a total of 5 yamas, and I will make another video going into a little bit more depth on the yamas and what they mean. This leads me into the second limb of yoga, which is the niyamas. Just like there are 5 yamas, there are also 5 niyamas. The difference is that you can think of the niyamas as internal disciplines. Essentially, the niyamas are guidelines and rules of how to treat yourself and the behaviors that affect you internally, whether it's physically, mentally, or emotionally. Again, I will make a separate video that dives into the niyamas a little bit more specifically. Our third limb of yoga is the most common one that people think of when they think of yoga, and that is the asana. Asana is the physical practice of yoga and is essentially the yoga shapes and postures that you see in a typical yoga class. The fourth limb of yoga is pranayama, also known as breath work. Often, breathwork practices are controlled breathing patterns. They can be included in a typical yoga class, or they can be a completely separate practice in which the whole entire practice is surrounded around pranayama and the breathing patterns themselves. The fifth limb of yoga is a little bit less popular and is known as pratyahara. Pratyahara is essentially withdrawal of the senses and withdrawal from mental stimuli. There are many different pratyahara practices, but one of the more popular pratyahara practices is Yoga Nidra, also called Yoga Nidra. Essentially, it's a practice where you completely disconnect from external stimuli to turn inwards, to notice what's going on within the body and the mind, and ultimately for introspection. This leads us into the sixth limb of yoga, also known as Darana. Darana is focused concentration. It's a little bit different than meditation because of the idea that you are focusing on a singular object. So similar to withdrawal of the senses and withdrawal of stimuli, you are blocking out the mental stimuli around you to focus on this particular object, this singular object. Now this leads me into the seventh limb of yoga, which is dhyana, also known as meditation. Now this is a broader sense of meditation and is more in line what usually you think of when you think of meditation. Again, this is a practice that can be found in a typical yoga class, or meditation can be its own completely separate practice. Now it is believed that all 7 of these limbs lead us to the last and final 8th limb, which is samadhi, also known as enlightenment. Some people even consider it pure bliss. So when you hear people talk about the idea that yoga is a lifestyle and it's way more than the physical practice, this is what they mean. There is a lot that goes into yogic philosophy and principles, and this is just a very brief surface level touch on those principles and practices. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button below and share. I will see you next time. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.